Hurry up, please. May my phone work see? Why won't the buttons receive my touch? Oh, fuck this shit up. Let me try and do the phone because this phone will be freezing or just not respond to my touch. But I done did something to it. Hey, what's going on, y'all? It's your boy Tryst telling you Eric Adams ain't shit while I bring you news in this apocalypse. So, what's good? Hey, thank y'all for blowing up the views on the last video I put out, the one on T. Jakes. I appreciate that. Anyone who's sharing and everything like that, like the video, subscribe. I appreciate all of that. So I thought of, a few different things we could watch, today. There's all kinds of things that's going on in the world right now. I'm going to talk about something a little different this time around. What I want to talk about today, if you didn't get the hint, is involving Eric Adams, is involving his policies around migrants. It's just involving the way he's turning New York into a worse place to be, especially by treating the huddled masses that we're supposed to be welcoming like they ain't shit. If you don't know, Eric Adams is the mayor of New York City. He's, what you'd call a cop mayor, very pro-police. He's been quoted saying things like being in defense of stop and frisk, which, despite it being voted unconstitutional for the way it's targeted, especially black men and boys, and despite it overall, not yielding as much evidence as they would when they were actually pursuing other people who they actually suspected of crimes. They're just using racial profiling. He's been supportive of that. He's been cutting budgets for all kinds of New York services, from libraries to homeless services and everything like that. Just fuck shit. And how we need to get his ass out whenever we get a chance to vote. If you can get anyone but Courtesy Silva in that bitch, listen, let's do it. But I got a couple videos I want to react to. There's this video by someone named Cash Jordan. It begins, NYC starts blocking migrant buses. PBS NewsHour, and see if they have a reflection on the history of right to shelter. And see how, according to the Young Turks, people have been able to get around Eric Adams and his trying to keep more people from coming to New York City. So let's look into that. I'll discuss my thoughts, and in the comment section, y'all can discuss your thoughts as well.
Record high of hundreds of thousands of migrants entered the United States in December, and there are no signs that this crisis is slowing down as thousands of asylum seekers arrive at major cities across the country. We're talking Chicago, Denver, New York City.
One of the reasons New York City has been such a magnet for migrants is that this city has a long-standing tradition of offering shelter to anyone who requires it. But now, after 40 years, that commitment may be in jeopardy. Last week, Adams started requiring buses that are transporting migrants, many sent from Texas, to give advance notice of their arrivals. 6 additional buses arrived at the Port Authority bus terminal overnight, hours after Mayor Adams issued a new executive order requiring 32-hour notice.
This comes after 14 buses arrived from Texas in just one night.
So that we can be prepared, so that when the migrants do arrive to New York City, we can get them to where they need to get to safely.
Fines and even criminal charges could be the consequences, according to the city.
You're allowed to drop off migrants in the city, but you're going to do it at the location that we specified, so we don't overtax our resources, our manpower.
Interesting plan, but will it work, or is it too little, too late?
Good question. As y'all know, or if y'all follow, Texas governor's name is Greg Abbott. As a way to supposedly spread the contagion of people seeking asylum, people trying to flee, whether it's climate change, drug cartel war, gang war, whatever that type of situation they're trying to flee from Central and Southern America, people are coming up here, and people are going to have all kinds of thoughts on immigrants. My view overall is that, I don't hear the same complaints about letting refugees from Ukraine in the war effort situation and versus people trying to escape all kinds of, distress and harm that admittedly U.S. policies and the multinational corporations that we support continue to, exacerbate in their countries. And as you see, the video says over 150,000 asylum seekers have come to New York City. That's a lot of people. I'm not going to I'm not going to sugarcoat that. So, yeah, under normal circumstances, would we want this many people just suddenly being pushed in the city? No, you would want, one, the situations where they're coming from to be taken care of and people not have to flee whatever their situation is at home. All that aside, his attempt to, make the rest of the world take on the same, xenophobic attitudes towards Spanish or Hispanic migrants that he has and his Republican Party has. He's been sending them to the liberal states and everything like that, like New York City, busing people across the country all the way up to New York, as if, to say, oh, you claim you want them or you claim you want more people opportunities. And of course, our mayor is, again, he's a cop. If there's anything he loves doing, it's being a cop and fucking with people that he can fuck with. And that's putting people in perpetual instability, despite, again, the plethora of, free apartments that we have in this bitch. I will say, though, we've only just begun to see. For real, how do I say this? As climate change gets worse, my nigga, this type of eco-fascism and, hating people coming across the border is going to get worse because guess what? It's going to be from all over the world. Look at what's happening right now. That's another thing that I got to bring up at some point, but, encapsulating that whole thing in the video is going to be another thing. Israel genociding the hell out of, Palestinians, about to start a whole war with Iran and bring the U.S. into a whole war in Iran over it as well. Think about already the refugees and the potential migrants from that. Think about the fact that large swaths of Africa have had a drought and haven't had rain in 5 years. And think as every year is the hottest year on record, how much people are going to have to leave those countries at some point and migrate to cooler temperatures to survive and not be around places where all the crops are dying out. So unless we start taking until we start acknowledging situations on the world stage more and taking them seriously, we are front if we're acting who are these people to just come and flood our shores and not assessing how the math. We just see equals 5 and not doing the who brought the 2, who brought the 3, who added these things together to create these types of situations, who was allowing these things to take place. But yeah, restrictions on saying people have to be dropped off here, this is where people will be processed, this is where you have to let us know ahead of time. My initial reaction isn't against that. Let's just see what that it's not just how things sound, it's what is the actual impact of doing this versus doing that. So let's see.
Here we are at the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City, where recently 14 buses arrived on a single day carrying asylum seekers from the U.S. southern border. Now, each of these buses can seat between 50 and 60 people, which means 14 of them can carry around 750 people, who all arrived on the exact same day. On top of that, over 150,000 asylum seekers have already come through the city since this humanitarian crisis began, completely filling the city's emergency shelters. And because of that, New York City's mayor has decided to take drastic action to limit the number of buses that can come to the city every single day.
Mayor Eric Adams announcing an executive order. First, it will require that charter buses transporting migrants give New York City at least 32 hours advance notice. 2, it will require that these charter buses arrive only between 8:30 a.m. and 12 p.m.
So now the way it works is buses from the southern border can only pull into this designated drop-off spot during a 4-hour window 5 days a week.
And it's kind of similar to a situation that's literally happening down the street from where I live, where there is one location for all migrants. They have a situation set up where as refugees and migrants are in these shelters, they have them on this bullshit kind of clockwork system where every 30 days you have to leave whatever shelter you're in and then go back to this one particular area in the Lower East Side. There's one building right basically across the street from the end of Thompson Square Park, and re-register every month to get back into a shelter, or else I guess you just gotta be homeless at that point, So in the same way that people have, I guess, 5 days out the week to stand in line all day in the cold even to, get their situations re-registered and go through this every single month, I guess, until they finally get their own apartment or something like that. It seems like in a similar situation, 5 days, so I guess for 20 hours out the week, there's going to be a window between, looks like 8:30 to 12:30, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week during the weekday, for people to be shipped up here, which means people that aren't being shipped up here during those time spans, where do they wait on the buses? Do they get left in other areas? And let's think about all the inhuman things we've done. Like we think of it from a perspective of these are foreigners, these are outsiders, we don't know who the fuck they are. But let's think about again if these were, Ukrainian refugees, if these were Palestinian refugees, or if people don't give a fuck about those people's lives. Let's think of them if they were, refugees from an area that we actually gave a fuck about, like in England, France, and for whatever reason, they just shipped a bunch of people or flew a bunch of people overseas, and we had to like hold them up over here. Or let's say more locally, Canada. Let's say some geostorm situation happened, and everyone up north just was suddenly fleeing down into, the rest of the continental U.S. to join us down here in the United States. And think about all the things we've done, from, proposing a wall to keep people out, detaining people, separating families, keeping people in cages, looking the other way while like sexual assaults and abuses were happening to people and human rights violations were happening to people. Again, these are all kinds of wild things that people are going through just for the sake of surviving and being away from the worst dangers that they were fleeing. And now on top of that, again, these restrictions, I can see if it's from a perspective of, how do we manage the spaces we do have, which, again, I also get the point of Eric Adams, like earlier in the year, petitioning Katie Hochul to our governor to actually allow, migrants to be placed in other parts of New York outside of 5 boroughs. But again, I don't feel like there's a lot of care for these people as human beings, as individuals. Again, there's a lot of people. I get it. There's resources are overtaxed. But again, in treating people just like numbers, just like treating them like outsiders, like invaders, there's a lot of like abuses and a lot of like harm that's being, just taken as like, well, I mean, you came here, you just suffer with what you suffer with. And it's really revealing how we're not that much different from the people talking about, these are criminals, these are rapists, these are people that should be treated like scum and expelled out this country type of energy. And it's like, climate change is always going to be here on some level. We can do more to mitigate it, but as we continue doing the same old things, the worst and worst types of scenarios are going to be continue to be exacerbated. So what point of history do we want to be at and look back and be like, oh, we did the best we can, versus, hey man, it's a shame we had to sacrifice all of Africa and Southern and South America and every other place where we could find brown and black people. It's a shame we had to sacrifice all of them to have our white, bright future of the only climate survivalists who finally learned to adapt with nature and actually give a fuck about human rights versus, just saying we're a nation that does. Again, from an administrative level, I get saying we only have so many resources, there's only so much space. Are we not petitioning the federal government to create new policies to better help people, to better help get people distributed across the country so that they will have access to resources no matter where they land, so that we'll have better treaties or better relations with these nations that people are coming from, so that like we can establish whether there's another place they would be safer at, comfortable at. Because again, there's people on the other side that want to go to war with countries like Mexico, go into their country and just bomb them to kill cartel. And it's like the brain rot of an American empire that thinks it can just murder its problems and not just end up with Iraqs and Gazas, with Syrias and fucking Vietnams all over the fucking world.
Asylum seekers flown in from the southern border boarded buses to Chicago after landing in Rockford, Illinois. Their transportation north, arranged by Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Thousands of asylum seekers arrive at major cities across the country. Community members in these cities have been furious about the situation, but they're not the only ones. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson said on Face the Nation, city officials were given no notice.
The road buses that are being dropped off across this country in the middle of the night, leaving people with no real support at all, no coordination with the local municipalities. That type of chaos is our country.
Chicago is just one city dealing with the influx and now cracking down on buses, bringing in migrants without advance notice.
Bus companies who disobey this executive order in New York could face fines, the buses could be impounded, and people could potentially even be arrested. And all of this might limit the number of buses that come to the city every single day.
No, look, I'm not a huge fan of Eric Adams, but New York City is struggling with housing people, feeding people, providing the resources necessary to take care of migrants as they're coming in. The situation is untenable and it's difficult to deal with, and they're frustrated at the lack of support from the federal government. They're calling for the Biden administration to provide more resources. But in regard to the executive order that's been implemented by Eric Adams, there's a major loophole, and the bus operators are already seizing on that loophole. Last week, New York City Mayor Eric Adams issued an emergency order to restrict bus arrivals, but that hasn't stopped busloads of migrants now being dropped off at train stations in New Jersey. According to Secaucus, New Jersey Mayor Michael Ganelli, he says that the buses are now dropping migrants off at train stations throughout New Jersey, and then they board the trains and then just make their way to New York City as part of their final leg to New York City. He says, quote, "It seems quite clear the bus operators are finding a way to thwart the requirements of the executive order by dropping off migrants at the train station in Secaucus and having them continue to their final destination."
Now, bus companies faced with these restrictions in Chicago are just bringing their passengers to suburbs outside of the city. And from the suburbs, they can take a train or a ride share to get into the city itself. And while New York City may only have this one particular bus terminal, it's also got 2 airports and 2 train stations. So there are other ways for people to get here using mass transit. And this has the city's leaders very worried, because if someone wants to come to New York City, they still can.
He also said in a statement that he suggests that the order might actually be too stringent and it's resulting in unexpected consequences. He called the tactic a loophole bus operators have found to allow migrants to reach New York City, and added that state police have reported that this is now happening at train stations throughout the state. Ganelli vowed to work with state and county officials to continue to monitor the situation closely.
Why would you arrest the bus drivers? It's very dumb. For all I know, there could be a person doing that out of a humanitarian desire versus just doing it as a job. But it's like, where is the talking shit to the governor of Texas? All that energy. Where's that energy for talking to the liberal governor who is putting people on buses? No, these people are just trying to flee the border. I don't think these flee across the border, flee whatever situation they got back home. I don't think these people are specifically saying, hey, send me to New York. New York. Send me to the Big Apple and all that shit. I want to see Statue of Liberty. People are just trying to get into a fucking land that supposedly is full of all these human rights and, you know, protections that they were having where they're from. Elevate your voice to a national stage, call out the governor of Texas for what he's doing, and say, instead of improving your state, all you're doing is shipping people without really, like, caring what happens to them. They took away Roe v. Wade. They fought to get rid of abortion rights. They fought to get rid of affirmative action. If they can get their way to get rid of gay marriage and divorce next. Like, they're pushing white supremacy. They're pushing anti-black education. So, again, why would I expect demons to have any angelic thoughts in them? But the idea is us waking up and recognizing these are who our leaders are, and not just voting. It's 2024. I'm not just saying this to encourage people, get out and vote blue no matter who. Because again, Eric Adams is blue. He's the one to be very, Republican, very conservative in the way he acts, very centrist, and ain't shit in the way he is. It's more than vote blue no matter who. It's deeper. It's about let's organize. Let's better take care of our community. Let's better take care of our neighbors. Let's be the best. Let's look out, because they're not looking out for us, clearly.
All of this might limit the number of buses that come to the city every single day. New York City is still the #1 destination for folks seeking asylum, and that has to do with the city's unique right to shelter rules that guarantee temporary room and board to anyone who asks. And for that reason, the mayor is now calling on New Yorkers to ask their federal elected officials for help. But that's got many Americans scratching their heads, because the reason the asylum crisis has reached such proportions here in New York is because of New York's unique right to shelter rules. For example, the city has laws going back to the 80s that guarantee temporary shelter to anyone who asks for it. These laws are unique to New York City and to many Americans, including those running the federal government in Washington. This situation could be one of New York City's own making, which explains why, even though the mayor's been to D.C. 10 times recently, the federal government isn't completely sold yet on the idea of having the rest of the country support a city that they don't necessarily live in, nor can vote in, or have any effect on how the place is run.
Okay, so maybe I was wrong, but I was wrong for a good reason. So it seems that people do want to come to New York. But again, for the sake of being treated like a human being and not fleeing one situation just to end up homeless on the streets, especially during the winter. And again, those right to shelter laws is something Eric Adams has been trying to get rid of ever since, getting into office and waging war on poverty and the homeless in the first place. Like, he was the one who launched all these campaigns about tearing down people's tents and destroying homeless encampments and making people have to matriculate in and out of shelters depending on how long they've been in there, as if guess your lazy ass needs to get back on the street if you can't fucking find a job in this time period. Never mind whatever jobs that aren't available for people.
This is what really breaks my heart.
Starting as soon as this week, the city will enforce a time limit for families, making those like Diana's reapply for shelter after 60 days, potentially moving them to any shelter in the city and even farther from her kid's school.
Again, we're not in a socialist utopia, so I get it. The way we operate isn't conducive to helping just anyone and everyone as is. But at some level, we gotta recognize these are real human beings and lives that are being destroyed and being played with and being toyed around with and used for political gain and sport, and to use an example of why more police need to be hired versus more libraries, more shelters, or better yet, fuck a shelter, fucking housing, and then help with jobs, and then as they can pay off that housing, you free up more spaces for people to be. In a fucking capitalist place where, housing is a fucking capitalist commodity, who would want to do that shit?
As the city runs out of room to house migrants, they've also been continuing their push with the states to lift the right to shelter mandate, which requires that the city provide shelter to anyone who needs it.
But New York City is also trying to change a key part of its support for migrants. This fall, officials asked a court for more flexibility when it comes to the city's so-called right to shelter rule.
And this is why the rest of the country is somewhat reluctant to continue bailing out the city. New York's right to shelter mandate goes back to the 1980s when the state Supreme Court ordered the city to provide shelter.
Officials argued that 1981 rule governing the homeless is, quote, outmoded and cumbersome in the face of the present migrant crisis.
To many Americans, if this issue were really as big a deal as the mayor and other elected officials are making it out to be, they would do something to amend the process for how the city handles situations like this.
Let's not also talk about, yes, 1980s New York shelter law. Why was it a thing in the first place? Because again, for New York to do that in the first place means there was some kind of crisis that led to it. So in the face of this, let me actually read the article I pulled up.
Because of Tryst serve noise in the back. I'm doing this while I'm lying in a hospital bed. Nothing too serious. Just got a bit of a sore throat. I just want to get checked out just in case I go away today or wait till tomorrow. Want to get better just in time for my birthday so I can actually celebrate. But I'm updating because I put a couple articles here. Pause the video so you can get a chance to actually read it, or I can just put the links in the description as well. But yeah, just take a look at what the actual history of right to shelter is, how it was meant to protect homeless people from dying from exposure, essentially, for being mistreated, actually looking out for their rights. And now, we've used the xenophobia and fear of foreigner takeover and crisis to our city to end something that was meant to look out for people. So yeah, don't take for granted that people really, advocated for and died for things that are quietly being taken away just to make life harder for people we don't want to take care of. So yeah, it took some applause, but you had time to read it over and wish me luck getting better. So I can actually have a great birthday. Thanks.
Yeah, check it out. Look at these things that tie back to the Great Depression, to tie back to whatever homelessness crisis was going back on during the fucking 80s, during the crack epidemic years and shit like that. Well, 1979, so right before that crack epidemic really started rocking and shit like that. Okay, let me reread that in a way that makes sense. The amendment also served to safeguard from potential judicial scrutiny the state's power to help destitute people, which is the thing that they're trying to challenge now, and they're trying to get rid of, and trying to act like they're not. The thing that I think Eric Adams to some degree also did suspend right to shelter, but the thing that they ultimately want to just get rid of altogether is rules, like basically safeguards against homelessness. They want to be able to say, fuck you, die in the streets. And not only that, but especially considering how Mayor Eric Adams' administration and the police have been used to wage a war on the homeless, tear down encampments, and then say, oh, would you like to get in a shelter now, or would you, I guess, want to have to fucking scrounge all this back up out of nowhere in order to survive the night? What's it going to be, bitch? Like, that's literally how his administration and the police have been treating the homeless. And they apparently want to do that to migrants too. It just looks worse to do that to migrants, since people are literally fleeing situations and being bussed up here, and you would look worse than Republicans by just treating them the way we treat homeless people. So we jump through all these extra hoops when it comes to migrants, and we complain about the gymnastics we're doing to not be as brutal to them as are the homeless, and to not even be more brutal to the homeless than we're already being. So it seems like a lot of this is trying to get people to give up on helping migrants, and in turn give up on helping the homeless.
Over the last 20 months, the shelter system in New York City has basically doubled. More than 67,000 migrants are now housed in shelters, massive temporary tent camps, and hotels. It's a modern-day Ellis Island, 19 stories tall in Midtown Manhattan. The once grand Roosevelt Hotel is now the first stop for many newly arrived migrants to New York City.
There'll be more than 500 asylum seekers that are under those doors today.
Dr. Ted Long is an executive with the city's hospital system, which runs the arrival center and many of the city's shelters. COVID shuttered the Roosevelt, but since opening to migrants last spring, more than 85,000 have filed through here. After registering, asylum seekers move to a former ballroom for health screenings and optional vaccinations. Elsewhere, there's information about immigration and work laws.
If we're able to identify friends or family that you want to go to, we'll buy you a ticket anywhere in the world.
Long says up to a quarter of those who arrive in New York City choose to leave within 24 hours. But for those that stay, housing is the biggest single support the city provides.
We've learned a lot about the specific needs of asylum seekers in every part of the arrival center. We're bringing up front how we can help you to address those needs.
Providing all this support has not been cheap. City officials estimate this current migrant influx will cost more than $12 billion over 3 years.
Adams says the migrant crisis will cost New York $12 billion by 2025.
With the asylum crisis estimated to cost the city $12 billion over the next 3 years, it could mean that this executive order does little to impact New York City's overall predicament, which is why the mayor recently told New Yorkers that the best way to solve this crisis is to take matters into their own hands.
What does that even mean? One, two, I don't know if he's just presenting the news or if he has a particular agenda in the way he's saying, but the media literacy will tell you that while that might be a perspective because again, like whatever happened in Texas, do I think about how people are living in Texas and what we should do to support the people in Texas? Maybe people being bused up to New York helps alleviate some of the situations that's happening for people in Texas. Although, let's be honest, that's not why he was doing it. He wasn't saying like, oh, New York would love to help. Let me skip all these states between us and New York and go right to New York and send motherfuckers up there. That's who would be the happiest to help support us in our time of need. It wasn't like that. But again, in this concept of us being a country and not just a collection of states that could just do whatever the fuck we want, we're acting like it's the problem of having rules that are a little bit more give a fuck about human beings than the rest of the fucking country. Like, oh, listen, y'all the ones with the right shelter law. You could tell these niggas any day of the week live on the streets, be homeless, and then be subject to being harassed by police and having shit stolen by other people who are in desperate situations, or just by fucking people who resent, homeless people and unhoused people and want to fucking run their shit and run them out of town and fucking call the police on them 24/7. Like, it's your fault for having even this modicum of care. Not even really care, but like having rules that say you gotta do something. You gotta treat people like if you don't want them to be seen, if you don't want streets crowded with people just huddling together for warmth and survival, you gotta fucking provide them some limited level of shelter. So the bare minimum, again, we're acting like the bare minimum New York has. It's their fault for having that, for having this crisis happen in the first place. Is this how we treat migrants? Is this how we treat the homeless? Look at that.
So things are at a point now where the mayor is asking New Yorkers to ask the federal government for continued assistance with this crisis.
Like other mayors, Adams blames the federal government for not doing enough, but is also critical of border state officials like Republican Governor Greg Abbott of Texas.
This is a national problem that has only been exacerbated by Governor Abbott's cruel, inhumane politics.
Which is true. Again, Democrats like to get by on being less evil. Only in politics can your position simply be, I am less evil than my opponent and still expect to win and get votes, and people just suck it up. If you as a husband were like, look, I'm a gaslighter, but I'm not physically abusive. So between this dude and me, you might as well choose me. Like, am I going to steal your money and call you crazy and make you doubt your reality? Sure. But am I going to do that while putting my hands on you, or while demanding you give it up to me every night? Nah, I'm not gonna do that. So like, I'm less bad. Roll with me, or else your ex over here is gonna be pa 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 pa. Like, Greg Abbott, fucking cool as fuck. And Eric Adams, that's no excuse for you to be slightly less cruel than him. Both y'all motherfuckers can do something.
Many leaders in the city are in favor of maintaining right to shelter because it keeps families with nothing from having to live on the street. But the problem is right to shelter is very expensive, which is why the city has to make controversial cuts to education and police. And this is because the city is completely out of resources. But the mayor says the city wouldn't have to make these cuts if its wealthiest residents would just give it more money. And some people think comments like this are the first step towards raising taxes, because if rich New Yorkers won't voluntarily turn over more of their money, the city can come up with new taxes and fees to get more money that way. And that might sound crazy until you consider just how deep the city's latest cuts have had to go, and how they could end up doing more harm than good.
So see, I don't know if he's just presenting the news or if he has a particular agenda in the way he's saying, but as overtime window moves, and if it moved more right, and we were to say, if all of us were like, yes, fuck right to shelter, get rid of that shit. Okay, so the people that you are now worried about being a burden on the system through being put in shelters would be even more of a burden to the system on the streets. And y'all hate seeing people on the streets too. And y'all can complain about these mothers being on the streets with their children and then want CPS to get involved and separate these families on some fuck shit. And then we're gonna have a bunch of kids separated from, like, it's another level. Like, it's saying that's, I'm not saying that's 100% gonna happen, but just say, if history is any indication, that's just another level of like new neo-colonialism. And just, fucking breaking families apart, breaking cultures apart, and not giving a fuck about people's lives for the benefit of being able to complain about how much money people are costing the city. And just saying, like, they're here, this is a reality, let's deal with it, and let's deal with it in a way that we can sustainably handle it going into the future, so that if the situation was to get worse in the future, we'd already have a handle on it and be able to move with it. And it's like, listen, the federal government, of course, should do more. Because what is the alternative? Is the alternative just shutting down our borders to other people coming in, saying we can't take anything else, and again, just treating it like the pretend money? Because again, all this shit, the billions that people have, all of this is laissez-faire economics. It's all fucking shit that exists in computer systems. This is shit that is essentially not real outside of how we just move fucking numbers on an accounting book in a fucking Excel spreadsheet and shit like that.
How is it that we've ended up with a system in which banks have the power to create money? Since 1971, when President Nixon took the United States off what was left of the gold standard, the world has operated under a system of money known as fiat. The dollar, the pound, the euro are all government fiat currencies. Fiat is a Latin word meaning let it be so. It is the law that this government currency be money. Indeed, without that legal enforcement and the fact that we must pay taxes with this money, that dollar bill or that computer digit that represents a dollar would be pretty much meaningless. Only the government has the power to issue fiat money, but banks can create it through lending. Over the last 40 years, since this system of fiat money became the global norm, the supply of money has grown exponentially. In fact, we've seen the greatest growth in the supply of money in history. But who benefits?
So, again, are we prioritizing human lives, or are we prioritizing profit? Are we prioritizing, the fucking industries that we're going to pay exorbitant amounts to do the bare minimum, or are we going to try and step up and do more than the bare minimum? Again, I'm talking very communistic, like I'm not the motherfucker who's running the program is doing the shit. And I get it, you gotta pay people to do shit and everything like that. But again, when typewriters were no longer the most feasible way of writing, did we complain about the danger to the typewriter industry, or did we move along with it? When fucking horses were no longer the most viable way to get around in the city, did we complain about what it was going to do to the fucking horse and stable industry, to farmers and shit, or do we move along with it and get automobiles and bikes and shit? So why is it when it comes to treating people with some human decency, it's a fucking problem, we complain, but all the industries that is going to fucking ruin if we fucking actually treat people like living human beings instead of people who are fucking ticks sucking on a system that exists to take care of people. We are in a state, in a city, in a country to contribute to it so that it in turn takes care of us with its laws and its protections. So why do we always act like, hey, you're getting a little bit too much protection over there? It's a white supremacist mindset. And again, I get us as people on the outside looking like, oh, why aren't more being done for us? Well, yeah, why aren't more being done for all of us? Let's do more for those who need most, so that we can then also argue for more being done for us, who are also struggling and suffering. It's not a lose-lose to look out for those who are more in need than you. Look out for those who are more in need for you is a win-win, because once you've provided for them and looked out for them, now you can now make an even better argument for why they should look out for you too, who's also going through certain things and also contributed this much and is not a quote-unquote as much of a burden on the quote-unquote system that we are funding in the first fucking place and that exists for us and our families to exist in the first place. Otherwise, we just go back to being intelligent animals that can think and build shit and enjoy shit on TV. You know what I'm saying? Instead of being in a fucking society and country and contributing to it. And again, I'm not saying that he's saying this. He could be doing the Philip DeFranco thing of, saying this is what people are saying, that's, when you're presenting an essay, you were providing the other argument, saying, listen, this is a problem New York's still making. And I'm not saying he is saying, but I'm just saying, sometimes we'll read things or hear things and just say, yeah, that's, without thinking that deeper.
So none of the cuts that the mayor wants to make are popular at all, especially those to police who are dealing with increased robberies and assaults, cuts to the fire department who recently rescued New Yorkers from a collapsing apartment building, and very controversially, cuts to New York City's understaffed public schools, which critics say will only hurt kids. And the problem for New York City is that without funding from another source, these cuts are going to have to happen. And people are concerned the city could literally turn into a complete dump as the sanitation department stops emptying roadside trash bins like these right here, which means even more trash than normal will start piling up along New York City streets. But the thing that's got a lot of New Yorkers upset is that the city claims it doesn't have the money, therefore it has to make these cuts. But some people say that might not be true. The city is actually owed $2.1 billion in uncollected fees and violations, which if collected could be very helpful for funding things like schools and police and libraries and the fire department and the 1,400 Parks Department employees who are about to lose their jobs.
We're seeing the erosion of the quality of life that we've improved on in such a short period of time of this administration. And we have been impacted. For many months, we were able to keep the visualization of this crisis from hitting our streets, but we have reached a breaking point. We're no longer able to do that because of the volume in numbers. Just last week, we had 3,900 people that arrived here. We are averaging anywhere from 2,500 to close to 4,000 a week. And if you do the math, you see that's 8,000 every 2 weeks, potentially 16,000 a month that we must feed, clothe, house, educate children, and all the services that you would give a normal adult. And we're seeing that play out on our streets of New York. And that is what the breaking point looks like, what we are experiencing right now.
In November, Democratic Mayor Eric Adams announced budget cuts and warned more were likely.
I don't have deportation powers. I don't have the powers to turn buses around. I don't have the powers to say we're not going to give you some form of housing. I don't have any of that power. And all I have the powers to do is to balance the budget.
What did I say? Again, balance the budget. Treating this shit like fucking numbers you move around on a fucking Excel spreadsheet. That's how they see this. They're not thinking about human lives. This motherfucker should not be in office doing anything. Again, notice he didn't say, listen, I don't have the power, because he probably would have it some degree. He didn't say, I don't have the power to house people indefinitely. I don't have the power to, make sure that we are getting federal, like almost a city or state guarantee for a job so that people could work or train to get the qualifications to support themselves and their families and, be able to pay the city back for getting them, cheap housing, affordable housing. Again, because that's the real thing. They're not even trying to inject that into the conversation because that is what the power brokers and the donors who support these parties don't want nobody talking about. But he's not saying, I don't have the power to fucking do a city or statewide, guarantee for a job and job training to get people, employed so they can pay back the city for the services or that they can contribute, back and so that this alleviates how much we're spending on people. No, that's not the discussion. It's, I don't have the power to deport people, to turn buses around. Imagine, if he could, he'd probably say, listen, because he said, don't bring niggas in the afternoon, bring niggas in the morning time. 8 to 12:30, 8:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. After that, tough luck, nigga. I guess drop them off in Jersey somewhere. I guess wait outside state until the next day and then pull them niggas in. Because he said, if I could, I'd limit that shit to an hour. I'd give you 30 minutes to all reach up here at the same time. If I was mayor of anywhere else, I'd get to say, fuck you, live in the streets, and guess what? My police will still harass you anyway for not having a home. Now, I have to do some bare minimum of treating you like a human being. So I guess, if I gotta give you a shelter, I'm gonna give it in a way that you're gonna regret it, bitch. Again, this is the mindset of a cop, the mindset of a politician who doesn't give a fuck about human beings, just gives a fuck about power and what he can do to people. But yeah, he's not saying I don't have the power to basically work with people and train up people. And because again, if you're going to do that for migrants, people who are unemployed in New York and are actually looking for a job or want, are underemployed and want better opportunities, they would then argue, well, why aren't you doing that for us? And again, America being America, New York being New York, Eric Adams being Eric Adams, would be like, well, shit, you're right. If I can't do for you, I shouldn't do it for them. Versus saying, you know what, if I'm going to try to do this for them, I should do it for y'all too. Let's increase training for everyone. Let's, break down the barriers for underemployment. Because again, the fucking industries that are giving these people their fucking campaign donations and everything like that don't want talk of higher raises, don't want talk of more social mobility, don't want talk of, actually being concerned about citizens advancing and being happy and, living and being able to afford to live and take care of their families. They want people to be stressed and competing for every last crumb. They want people to be locked in an unofficial caste system that they find it hard to escape unless they or their family members either risk it all, bet big, and hopefully don't have to go home, or whatever. They want people to be swimming upstream like salmon and use just constant successes that make it in as a fairy tale story of the success of capitalism, and not notice all the other ones that don't make it upstream and then don't get to fucking continue their family legacy, their cultural legacy into the next generation. Again, as much as people complain, as much as they're trying to force people to still have kids, and force people to not be child free and everything like that, like getting rid of abortion rights and want to get rid of contraception, wanting to get rid of gay marriage, so people are compelled to get into hetero relationships and have children. Again, it's nothing is being done to actually make sure that people can do that out of their own free will. Because again, capitalism isn't about your free will; it's about do or die, essentially.
There's something really wrong with the biggest corporations that have ever existed, more powerful than governments. This is the feedback that I get from so many of you is you feel like you're in a rat race, you feel like a hamster on a wheel.
That's capitalism, baby. Yes. That you are describing what capitalism forces us to do. You're describing the results of the coercion of capital. That's just capitalism, Stephen. Capitalists literally jizz their pants over the idea of being able to profit off of people against their will. That's what gets a business hard in the morning. All right, this is capitalism. This is part of what the enshittification of products is like. That's what this is. You're just upset that capitalism sucks ass, but they can't say that.
But notice there again, what have they made the culprit the enemy? The simple band-aid that could be ripped off to make the situation better for us, rather than better for humanity on a whole. Get rid of right to shelter. The thing that Eric Adams has been trying to do for a minute. Suspend the right to shelter, so again, we can treat migrants and homeless people inhumanely and just expel motherfuckers, push them to the edge of town, to the edge of the city, to the edge of the state, and say, good luck out there, nigga, and hopefully someone else will receive you. Find your way. Just, again, explode the homelessness population to, proportions we haven't seen since in forever, just to not have to worry about where we're going to put people. That's the solution. That's the wise band-aid some people have come up with. They won't keep sending people here if for all you know, Greg Abbott would love to keep sending people if you suspend the right to shelter law. Again, that's not a real solution. That's how do we not make this our problem? That's again trying to move fucking numbers on a fucking Excel spreadsheet to fucking push that shit over there. That's that kind of energy.
The lead importer of migrants to New York, it's not Texas, it's Joe Biden.
This comes as the U.S. Border Patrol manages a record migrant surge. Agents are processing 250,000 new arrivals each month. In December, hitting an all-time high of 300,000 migrants. That number absolutely blew me away. 300,000 migrants coming into the United States in just 1 month.
Amid record numbers of migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexican border, Governor Abbott is unapologetic about transporting some people north.
What you're dealing with in New York is a tiny fraction of what is happening every single day in the state of Texas.
As CBS News also reports, U.S. Border Patrol agents took into custody more than 225,000 migrants who crossed the southern border in between official crossings during the first 27 days of December, and that's according to the preliminary Department of Homeland Security statistics. The figure does not include legal entries at ports of entry, where the Biden administration has been processing roughly 50,000 migrants each month, mostly under a process powered by a smartphone app, and nearly 60% of all migrants processed by Border Patrol in December crossed into the United States illegally in the remote Tucson, Arizona, and Del Rio, Texas sectors, where officials have recorded between 2,000 and 3,000 unlawful crossings each day, according to the internal DHS data. So when you hear reports about how Border Patrol is inundated and overwhelmed by the influx of migrants, that does appear to be true. In both regions, migrants have found themselves sleeping outdoors near international bridges or border barriers because Border Patrol is basically lacking the manpower and resources to process everyone in a timely fashion.
It's a crisis, it's chaotic, and it must stop.
And listen, this is the whole reason Greg Abbott did this shit in the first place. Republicans act in a fascist way, an eco-fascist way in regards to only caring about climate change and drugs and shit like that, how it affects, not even that, their donors, and how it affects their rich constituents and how it affects them and their ivory towers. And then Democrats from their ivory, smaller but still ivory towers, then complain about, listen, look at all the work they're giving me, all the people they want me to give a fuck about. I have to let half these motherfuckers die. But I do it for you, the people. Like, that, they want to congratulate them for not being able to do shit and trying to do, again, the bare minimum. Trying to save the bare minimum people they can. And be like, listen. They were sending all these people to be executed. If I can only save a couple, thank me for it. Reward me for pardoning the bare minimum. Please. That's what I'm here for. Just doing the reasonable thing of like going to the federal government saying, hey, how do we provide relief for all these people? How do we distribute people in a way across the country that they will be looked out afterwards? And how do we then balance this shit so that our citizens and their states aren't overburdened with, bringing relief to people? Well, again, in a perfect world where we actually give a fuck about people versus hoping certain people died off to make it easier for the more privileged people. In that world, instead of having that world where we operate where like, hey, could there be some slivers of like money we just give to our military or use for some other shit where it's just used to kill people or just used to be a jobs program for military contractors or intelligence agencies or whatever the fuck? Could we put some of that money, to helping balance some of these, humanitarian crises that directly impact us so that we have a system in place for as things get tougher and tougher in the world, we are already facilitated in doing something that makes sense? No? Okay. And this is another thing too. Because yes, fuck the president too over their handling of this situation. And again, their neoliberal incrementalist approach to everything. We are in the worst time. And you have one side that is speedily moving to fascism that would say, fuck all of this shit. We're sending you motherfuckers back. We'll find a way to send you niggas back to Africa. We'll find a way to send you women back into the kitchen, and we'll find a way to send you gays back to the closet. And we'll find a way to put you disabled people back and mentally ill people back into asylums. And out of sight, out of mind type situation. And us able-bodied white men can fucking continue to proliferate and run the world the way it should be through the very end until Jesus comes and slaughters y'all niggas anyway. That's, again, maybe I'm seeing things like that as somebody raised fundamentalism, last days, rhetoric, and everything like that. But the way the world is moving doesn't seem to tell me that I'm thinking in the wrong direction, because that's how our country is growing. Because Biden is a fucking corpse, slowly drying up every day, and because Kamala Harris is nowhere to be found, she's just waiting to be coronated just to lose Trump or Nikki Haley or DeSantis or whoever the fuck makes it on the Republican side. Hitting again. Okay. But yeah, let me see if I can find a quick video to look up the New York shelter, the history of the New York shelter law. Because again, let's not also talk about, 1980s New York shelter law. Why was it a thing in the first place? Because again, for New York to do that in the first place means there was some kind of crisis that led to it. And if you want New York, New Yorkers are calling on you to do something. If you want, and you're just calling on Biden for more money, why not call on Biden to, open up more places for there to be situations for people, or fast track citizenship for people? Call on Kamala Harris, have her meet with you, whether it's a law, executive order, because Eric Adams, as you can see, loves signing executive orders his damn self. Find a way to fast track the process of people becoming citizens, getting employment, getting housing, and everything like that. Getting employment so that they can pay to some degree their housing. Not exactly housing first, but something like a bastardized American version of it, where you focus on getting people housing first, and then over time they can get a job, help start paying the cost of where they're living and everything like that, and like get realigned back into, being quote unquote productive in society and all that bullshit. Like, why are you asking? Like, again, look at it. Like, our subway trains are colliding and shit. Like, why should it be on us to fix y'all problems? You know what I'm saying? It's very, roaring 20s with the Great Depression right around the corner type energy. When we know climate change is right around the corner. We know, like, we're gonna have to start. And again, we're trying to get people used to the idea of tightening the belt and, rationing and eating less at a time that they want to eat more. They want us to be the ones to give fuck less about people and give fuck less about ourselves, while they're going to continue to try and seek how they can continue to eat more and just leave crumbs, less and less crumbs for us. Like, let's wake up. Let's be aware.
Cenk, thoughts on the numbers of migrants coming in?
So my number one thought is it's real. The numbers are much larger than they used to be, and so that's true. And so our job is to be honest with you guys, not pick political sides and go, okay, well, it's inconvenient for the left for it to be true. It is true, okay?
I don't actually consider it a crisis. To me, this is the next wave of people becoming New Yorkers.
Brad Lander is New York City's comptroller, an elected position that's the chief financial and accountability officer.
New York City lost 400,000 people during the pandemic.
People moving away.
People move out. That's just the history of New York City. It is a short-term cause, and we need more help than we're getting from Washington especially and from Albany, but it's not the primary driver of the budget gaps.
We lost all these people who are spending all this money. So it's not even an issue of space, for real. I didn't know anything about how New York lost 450,000 people either due, I guess, COVID death or just people relocating outside of fucking what was once COVID headquarters in this bitch and whatever. But again, don't tell me numbers like 160,000 migrants. Like, that's supposed to scare me and make me feel like, a whole tenth of America's population is like refugees and people we don't know where they're from, we don't know what they're bringing. Like, we're fucking at an orgy and we invited some random dude from off the streets to join it and shit. Like, no, we have a surplus of space, so it's not about the space. It's now about, we lost this money of taxpayers and everything like that. These people bring in the revenue instead of thinking how to, use our money more wisely, especially with shit we don't need, like 1 million police officers guarding every turnstile to, I guess, reap every single, dollar and cent we can out of every single New Yorker riding the train and bus every day. Sorry about this. My shit just going off. I see one roommate was going on me about my notifications being so damn loud. I see what they're trying to say. But yeah, it's not a space issue. It's a taxpayer dollar issue. Again, the same reason Eric Adams and so many of these other people love gentrification so much. Push these poor, broke, motherfucking, low-class, low-income Negroes, low-income whites that we don't give a fuck about, low-income Hispanics, low-income Asians, let's push Indians, all these motherfuckers, push all of these low-income motherfuckers out of the way so that we can gentrify this bitch and have people who can pay the higher taxes so that we can do some more shit and change nothing. Again, they just told me we're out of space, and you just told me that 450,000 people have left. The math's not mathing. There's still almost 300,000 people more that we can fill up. It's just that these people are the undesirable people. They are not the gentrifiers we were wanting. We're acting like we're being colonized when the colonizers, we're happy to be colonized just by gentrifiers, just by richer whiter people that can make the white intellectual utopia they're hoping to build. Yes, tax the rich more. But again, when you're trying to bring more gentrifiers into the city, it's hard to tax them more, isn't it? The idea is for them to be spending more taxes here, but when there's all kind of loopholes for them to jump through, it comes down to you just taxing the regular motherfuckers more, because those motherfuckers have lawyers. Those motherfuckers know the loopholes. Those motherfuckers know how to get around shit. But yeah, why would I voluntarily give up more money just because I'm rich? That's not how rich and greed work, motherfucker. It's not a space issue. It sounds like it's a desirables issue, and how much are we willing to give to help those we find undesirable?
The city is completely out of resources, which is forcing the city to make tough choices which could impact daily life for many of its residents. Specifically, the city is now cutting funding for the fire department, the police department, schools, and they're even going to fire the workers who take care of the city's parks. Now,
more than 1,000 New Yorkers who help to keep our city parks clean are expected to lose their jobs. This is one of many impacts of budget cuts announced last month.
So, New York City's parks are world-renowned. We've got Bryant Park, Central Park, the High Line Park, even Times Square qualifies as a park. And although these parks are great now, that might not be the case if these cuts end up going through, and 1,400 of the people that work at parks like this and take care of them end up losing their jobs on account of the city's asylum crisis. Also, greenery and trees are such a rare commodity here in the city that a lot of people find it unacceptable for all of this to go to waste because the city just stops taking care of it. And on top of that, the city's parks department manages 14% of the landmass in New York City, which used to get cleaned multiple times a week, but now may only get cleaned one time a week. But on top of that, the folks who empty these trash bins and keep these walkways clear are some of the city's neediest, and they're the ones who are going to end up losing their jobs.
But budget cuts to New York City's Parks Department could result in a filthy city and a loss of over 1,400 jobs, including the agency's Parks Opportunity Program.
So at issue here is the Parks Opportunity Program, which offers training to New Yorkers looking to build their skills and climb the city's economic ladder. Specifically, the program employs New Yorkers at a rate of $15.45 an hour to clean and maintain the parks for 40 hours a week too, which means for many people this was a full-time source of employment, and likely the only source of employment they could get because many of the people in this program don't have a high school diploma yet. Plus, this program offers education that can help those get a high school equivalency degree, and since studies show that not having a high school diploma can set people back for their entire lives, this program was doing a lot of good for the people who needed it the most. The program also offers other types of training for people who might want to be security guards or work in food preparation. Basically, it's a program that was helping people get out of poverty while keeping the parks clean at the exact same time.
You're going to see more trash in parks. Bathrooms, if they are open at all, are going to be places you're not going to want to be.
Honestly, that sounds terrible, and these cuts aren't going to improve anything for anybody in the city. And critics of making cuts to this particular parks program point out that $15.45 an hour is $124 after 8 hours work, and the city's shelters spend $400 a day taking care of people, which is cheaper to pay people $124 a day to take care of the parks or to give them a place to live and no job for $400 a day. It doesn't make any sense. Plus, the people cleaning the parks are going to move on to better things after they get the training. And just look at how much benefit this particular park, Bryant Park, is for the city. There's all these little shops and businesses. It's a major tourist attraction, and the apartments across the street from the park end up costing a whole lot more than they would if this park were a dump. Plus, tourists who want to come to New York and maybe visit a park like this, they spend $50 billion a year, support 9% of the city's workforce, and add $6 billion a year to the city's piggy bank from taxes. And we're going to jeopardize all of that because we don't want to pay people $15 an hour. That's not everybody agrees with that.
Why are we acting so broke? We have all this money to keep all the lights on in Times Square on a regular basis, but we're too broke to pay the Parks Department to clean up the parks. Like it don't make no damn sense. Some of the city's neediest. That was a wild way to say that too. Are we underpaying the Parks Department and then calling them needy? And then, like, do you see where I say just helping people overall would be better? Like, why again are the city's neediest the ones that are most, expendable? I didn't hear him say, oh, we're going to lose the firefighters, oh, we're going to lose the police, and that will really motivate people and galvanize us to, like, get rid of right to shelter, whatever the fuck. Like, nope, the city's neediest, the first ones to go will be those park attendants and fucking cleaners and shit like that. The city's neediest. Like, okay, that was a weird way to say that motherfuckers aren't getting paid enough to do what they do. Like, fuck you. Jesus. Imagine you was working in the parks department and you heard somebody say that. Oh, you clean the parks? Thank you, city's neediest. Bitch, fuck you. What? But yeah, the parks, like, again, you want to make the city beautiful for gentrifiers, but you're not going to be able to afford to pay your parks department. Are you going to then hire migrants for less? Like, are you going to use them for cheaper labor? Like, what are you going to do? Are you just going to let dirty get fucked up and unsafe and look ugly and say that this is the fault of migrants? Like, do you see where it looks like we're more pressed to do shit that will fucking make people more mad at, like, desperate people than just do shit that's going to help desperate people and help us at the same time? Do you see, like, the correlation I'm talking about? Listen, I don't give a fuck about tourists, but yeah, guess what? Tourists are going to come even less if you get rid of right to shelter and all those people that are lining up down the block over there are now on every street. If you have 160,000 people plus up to anywhere from 60 to 100,000, homeless people that are native homeless people. If you had all those people just out on the streets, up to fucking over 200,000, anywhere from 200,000 to almost 250,000 homeless people out on the streets between the migrants and the New York native homeless and everything like that. Guess what? Tourists are going to be even less inclined to come here. So this is still not a situation you can ignore if you're going to really go with this argument that like the city can only afford to do so much because the budget cuts. Again, cut some from the fucking shit we don't need, like turnstile cops, and then we can then collect the money from these wealthy property owners who are paying their property bills that for some reason you're afraid to go after the money for. Come back to me with these arguments after you do that shit. Sounds like a program we should be expanding to more people. Ooh, wait, if we had a city/state guarantee for a job, maybe this would be a way to get more migrants also hired. Not saying replace, but again, we can keep the city, the streets, we can have the cleanest city in fucking New York while also educating people, getting them the diplomas and degrees that they need to climb the economic ladder. I'm seeing a way for there to be a win-win for everyone, but it seems like no one wants to take it. One day it'd be great for there to be a federal guarantee for work, for people looking for work, so unemployment would ship up and underemployment would disappear. If you were paying the minimum wage of $15 or $15.45, and again, hiring more people to do these jobs and then giving them the training on top of that, doing that for the migrants and for the homeless, these are ways to make these not be things you're paying the people to not work or thing for free and all that other shit.
So here we are at New York City's flagship public library on 42nd Street, which is no longer open on Sundays because of recent cuts. And in addition to making cuts to the library, the city is also making cuts to schools. But teachers are fighting back. The city's education department is actually in court right now suing because the cuts to education might in fact be illegal.
According to court documents, the city collected $8 billion more in revenue last fiscal year than projected.
We have an historic reserves in the city of New York.
The lawsuit alleges that Adams violated a state law which prevents the city from cutting education spending unless overall revenues decline.
So the city's teachers are in court right now suing because of the cuts, which the city has to make because unfortunately there's no money left. And so the reason these cuts might not actually be legal is because the city's tax revenue has actually gone up. The New York City public school system has one of the largest education budgets in the entire country. The current school year is going to cost $37.5 billion, but only 41% of that, or around $15 billion, is spent on actual classroom instruction, which means there's likely to be some savings found in that other 59% of the budget that doesn't go towards teaching kids in classrooms. Also, these cuts are going to be pretty tough because if you look at this chart, 41% of the city's money goes to non-negotiable mandated payments like employee benefits and pensions, which could mean that the only areas that can be cut are those that affect kids directly. School lunches, classroom learning materials.
Like what? Is he arguing that teachers will be paid less?
And the sad reality is that the school's massive budget probably can't be cut as much as anyone thinks.
Which again, they're entitled to. I don't see him making the same excuse for police officers. I don't see any excuse for like saying, oh, do police officers get benefits after a certain year? Do they get pensions? Cut that shit. Why do they need that shit? Again, why are we... like, what?
$0.7 billion on the fire department, which is about what the city spends on the pensions for those in the education department. And
fuck teachers! Fuck those teachers! Oh.
That's why emergency services like the police and the fire department continue to experience cuts, even though their budgets are very small in comparison.
Did it say $8 billion more? Because it sounds like we complain a lot when we... Let me see, because what?
41% of that, or around $15 billion, is spent on actual classroom instruction, which means there's likely to be some savings found in that other 59% of the budget that doesn't go towards teaching kids in classrooms.
According to court documents, the city collected $8 billion more in revenue last fiscal year than projected.
So we're complaining more despite collecting more. Okay. I hate it. I hate it here. We act so dumb. I hate it. So see that? So the city's tax revenue is going up, And yet we're making these cuts as if it's the fault of the migrants. So more money is being collected, but we're acting like it's the migrants' fault. There's less money to go around. And again, do you see the propaganda and the phrasing? The budget cuts that are being made to, pay for the migrants? Yes, because I'm sure these budget cuts wouldn't have been made if this wasn't a part of the reality that we're experiencing right now. Listen, they would have found, if it wasn't the migrants, it would have been some other thing. They would just focus on crime. If it wasn't migrants, they'd find a way to focus on some kind of crime, whether it's gun crime or whatever else, to be more of a reason why money shouldn't be going to libraries and should be going to the police departments instead. But because it's migrants, it's like, I guess to take care of them, help them out, not just have them streets, we gotta put all the money to this instead, blah, blah, blah. But there's always some excuse. Listen, there's probably a lot of teachers who probably aren't up to par with what we should be, educating our kids through. But the kids already can't read. The new generation is already having problems reading. They're already having issues with educating the youth of the future. We're already looking like we're going to be leaving a lot of kids behind, even though it's supposed to be no child left behind, right? So, it sounds like we should be investing more into the education and just thinking about what good education for children should look like in the modern era versus fuck teachers, fuck migrants. That seems like, it sounds like an easy answer for just cut this, and then the balance sheet of how we give a fuck about people is balanced. But no, there's consequences to everything we do. So let's think a little bit deeper versus just, how do I clear my little balance sheet and then say fuck this group to better improve this group. And we say, hey, let's look at what's going to help each group and let's look at how we can make that work together to have an umbrella that protects us all against the storm that's coming, bitch. Yeah, this is the fault of Eric Adams, Katie Hochul. You can even say Joe Biden for, again, our party is not giving a fuck enough about public education overall and being willing to take out of that at the risk of our future to then argue and complain about what bare minimum shit they're going to do for homeless people and migrant people. But again, if we moved from a spirit of taking care of everyone helps us take care of everything versus saying, listen, some of y'all are dead weight. And we gotta cut the fat. Again, are we treating society like it's meant to improve the lives of people? Or are we treating society like it's meant to crush certain people so other people can be raised up higher? One is born out of white supremacy and imperialism and racism and fucking classism, and the other is born out of considering what the future could be and aspiring for that better future. Yeah, it will hurt kids. But again, in a system that's becoming more and more favorable to charter schools and wants to de-incentivize public education because we want to make it more likely for poor people, minority people, black and brown people, people of color, to not be able to afford to give their kids good education. And to then, again, a lot of this is just to reinforce the unofficial caste system of white supremacy. And again, we find all kinds of ways to bend over backwards to keep these realities in place and to act like, white supremacy is just a natural operation of nature rather than something that richer, more powerful people are seeking to continue for the sake of their profits and keeping an underclass of people who are the ones doing the jobs that they don't want to do and are the ones that are propping up their wealth.
Here we are at a police station, and even though the police and the fire department and other emergency services have smaller budgets than the education department, they're continuing to be cut. And this past year, the city spent $5.8 billion on police and only $2.7 billion on the fire department, which is about what the city spends on the pensions for those in the education department. And not only is the city cutting things like overtime pay and staffing, new local rules are complicating matters by changing the way police do their jobs.
The other bill before City Council is called How Many Stops? It would require cops to record level 1, 2, and 3 stops. Sponsors of the bill say a cop would not have to record public interactions if, say, a tourist was to ask for directions.
So what's interesting about this bill is that although it may help spot unfair police practices, it comes at a time when police are already stretched to the bare minimum. And the law would require that police fill out reports every time they stop anyone in an official capacity. Now, a tourist who needs directions in Times Square, that's not a formal stop. But if the police suspect you're doing something and they stop you, they're then going to have to fill out one of these reports.
Every minute and every second counts when you get to that job. So we're going to have our officers sit there and do reports. It makes no sense.
Now, proponents of this bill say that it's not all bad for the police because it could exonerate them when they're accused of unfair policing practices. And if the police stop someone for something on the streets of New York, the reasons for the stop are going to be recorded, which creates a paper trail of information concerning why the stop took place. But extra work is going to take time, and when there's an emergency situation, the police don't have a whole lot of time.
Well, something confusing about that last bill, for a level 1 stop, a person technically doesn't have to stay to give their information. A cop will then have to use their perception to guess a person's race, ethnicity, and age.
So if officers have to guess a person's information, critics say it might not end up being all that accurate or all that useful. And although the idea is well-intentioned, is this the right time to try something out which takes the police time and gives them less opportunity to stop crime? And because the city's managing a humanitarian crisis, we're about to have the lowest level of police by 2025 because police graduation classes, those are being canceled as well, which means new officers aren't coming into the force and veteran officers are retiring. If current police retire and you aren't training new police, when new police eventually do come in, the veterans needed to mentor them and help them rise through the ranks and make a career out of being a cop in New York won't be there. And critics say policies like this could set the force back years, which is why the mayor and city leaders want more help managing the humanitarian crisis that's taking place here right now.
Sounds like between the two departments, there's one there that can afford to lose $1 or $2 more billion. Just saying. And let's not make this false equivalency between them and the public education system when there's way more, students in the public education system than there are ever fucking New York City police officers. Even with New York City police officers being, the department being big enough to count as like the 6th or 7th largest private army in the world. Like, why do we act so broke when it comes to helping people? But when it comes to arresting people, like, we find the money. When it comes to putting again, there's no money that's being taken away from cops being paid overtime to stand by turnstiles and act like they are stopping all of the crime in the world. Why would it be a bigger cost for cops to have to write down their interactions with people, thus incentivizing them to harass less people unnecessarily? Why is that, something that, we shouldn't have that. That's gonna cost too much versus, teachers who are already struggling and quitting en masse because of how difficult it is to be a teacher today and how much this next generation is unprepared, especially in the face of having gone through COVID and being set back in education through, the remote learning and the fucking increased levels of domestic abuse that a lot of people dealt with during that time period and, having to then get back to normal, to being back in classrooms in a world that they know gave zero fucks about the lives of people they were willing to sacrifice to keep the country running. Interesting. Those people don't deserve pensions. Those people don't deserve benefits. Fuck them. And instead, let's bring all that to the cops who are, defending our turnstiles against people who want to hop them like Olympic track and field athletes. Like, again, I see the argument you're trying to make, and I'm clocking your teeth because it's 12 minutes in. I don't think you're going to suddenly reverse your opinion last 3 minutes. But, fuck all that shit. Nah, fuck it. Listen, I get wanting some level of police, again, say ACAB all day, fuck the cops. But from a perspective of a regular average citizen who's not trying to get mugged or groped or otherwise assayed or assailed in some way, I get some level of police being inside of the station or inside of a train to make people feel safer, right? I get some kind of utility to that for the average, New Yorker who don't give a fuck about this socialist shit and is happy with some level of state power to threaten the undesirables from committing survival crime or whatever shit they're gonna do, right? That being said, who are the turnstile police protecting? Have you ever seen a turnstile cop? I'm gonna start calling turnstile cop because that's what those motherfuckers are. They're not protecting and serving shit, but a damn turnstile and the city's pockets, right? Have I ever seen a turnstile cop break up a fight, save anybody's life, anything like that? No. They're happy to be turnstile cops and just chill and post and try to snatch people up and give them tickets that are multitudes higher than what they would have paid if they paid for that stop that one day. Let's not act like the entire of New York City would just be hopping that bitch like fucking salmon, like fucking dogs at the dog show, like fucking horses at a horse show, whatever. And let's not act like everyone would be doing that if the police weren't there. I see plenty of people get on a select bus and still pay for that bitch, even though nobody is going to fucking go back and check and ask for a receipt anymore. I still see people paying it just faithfully out of like that's the right thing to do, quote unquote. So, as much as they argue the city loses 69 million, whatever, from fucking jumping over the turnstiles, I'm sure we lose a lot more from other dumb shit. Like the fucking, 2.1 billion that's not being collected in property bills. Y'all clearly don't give a fuck about that, so why are you so fucking pressed over turnstile shit? But that's what some of the city's budget, over what it looked like $155 million is going to protect. 69 million potential being stolen. The math isn't mathing, it's dumb.
So what's interesting about this bill is that although it may help spot unfair police practices, it comes at a time when police are already stretched to the bare minimum.
Are we saying we should allow for more police corruption so they're less stretched to the bare minimum? I'm sorry. I'm willing to pay more so that the cops harass less people. I'm okay with that expense. Just like I'm willing to pay more to help people rather than thinking that suddenly 200,000 homeless people in the streets is the solution we need to clear up our budget. I'm sorry. That's just me. I'm crazy like that. I know I'm losing, but that's just me.
This can help explain why, in New York City, where law and order takes place, even as crime has fallen over the past few decades and felony arrests have fallen with them, there are more misdemeanor arrests than ever before, ballooning from about 65,000 per year in 1980 to 250,000 per year in 2011. Approximately 30% of all misdemeanor cases in New York City result in adjournment in contemplation of dismissal like this, where prosecutors agree to dismiss a case, but basically keep it on the record for 6 months to a year in the meantime, without a guilty plea or conviction or anything. The process is part of the punishment. How much the system sucks? Yeah, that's the point.
And we can reach the point where we are literally at the point where we can agree, for the most part, that it makes sense for police to have to document when they're stopping people, so it decreases the chances of police unnecessarily harassing people they don't need to be harassing. It seems like you don't need as many cops out there as we might, imply we do.
There's a thing in New York City called ACDs, an adjournment and contemplation of dismissal. So they know that they have to dismiss this bullshit, stupid case eventually. So what they will say is they won't just fucking dismiss it like a reasonable person. They'll say they'll agree to an adjournment and contemplation and dismissal, which means they will keep this case open for 6 months or a year with the understanding that they'll dismiss it and seal it then. And you're like, this thing you did not do, this stupid case that is definitely going to be dismissed. But imagine trying to convince the average person. I swear to God, the court agreed that they're going to dismiss it. They said I made it as a stupid case. They're going to dismiss it in a year. They're like, Sure. Most cases in the criminal system will never end in conviction, end in conviction, end in trial, end in incarceration. They don't have the evidence, the means to do that. So what they do is, by having these long processes where you have a case and all the collateral consequences that come from having to appear in court, from having an open case, that's how they get you. That's why police make arrests on cases they know will get thrown out, or they know it's bullshit, or they want to retaliate towards you. You know how many people I've represented where they have no charge? They're charged with disorderly conduct, which is an infraction. It's not a crime in the first place. And it's they mouthed off to the police. The police was irritated with them, and they brought them in and arrested them knowing that this can't go anywhere. But the way that they will stress out and make a person's life hard in the interim, that's where the power is in.
And let's also not ignore that the whole reason we even have cops recording their interactions with the public in the first place is because they were killing people. They were abusing people's rights. They were fucking wilding. They were murdering people, breaking people's bodies, stealing people's properties. They're still doing it. This is not in a vacuum. This is not something oh, we put cops through so much. They're recorded, and now they have to also record their interactions with citizens that they're interacting with, unless they're a tourist. Oh, they were fucking violating rights as civil officers, as civil servants, as people who are supposed to protect and serve. So I don't give a fuck what you're talking about. Like, suck it up. Suck it the fuck up. Like, what? Stop people who are looking like they're suspiciously committing crimes or about to commit crimes. Why are we just stopping anybody to stop anybody? Right? Like, and again, Eric Adams is against that because he is a police officer who was in favor of stop and frisk despite it being ruled unconstitutional. So I get him not giving a fuck about people's rights. It seems like the whole reason he became a cop was because of his desire for power, right?
Let's unpack who Eric Adams is at his core, a black cop. Eric Adams is a black cop in the depths of his soul. And I am making an emphasis on black cop because there is something special, negative, but special about the black cop. And that's something that Eric Adams himself recognizes. The funny thing about my beef with Eric Adams is that deep down, that nigga agrees with me. He knows that we live in a police state because that's precisely why he became a cop. It's why he continues to adorn NYPD jackets at most press conferences despite being there and having retired years earlier. It's why he prioritizes the needs of NYPD above all else, because he knows that there is nobody more powerful than the police in a police state. But have you ever wondered how he became a police officer? When Eric Adams was just 14 years old, he was in a gang, believe it or not. He and his brother stole a TV set and a money order and were later arrested when Adams tried to cash that money order. Adams said that at the station, 2 white cops took the boys downstairs and began to beat them down, kicking them in their groin and testicle areas so that the injuries wouldn't show up. But that a black cop eventually looked into the room and told the officers, that's enough. They beat Eric Adams so bad that he said that he had blood in his urine for 7 days and they sent him to juvie. Adams said that it made his brother develop a deep hatred for the cops, but not him. He was drawn to the power. These white men had beat the brakes off them, 2 teenage boys, and Eric Adams said that he thought to himself, the cops had a great hustle. But that in particular, he said, he was enamored by the black cop. The power that the black cop had to be able to tell the white cops to stop was the closest thing Eric Adams said that he had seen to a black man being the equal of white folks. And he liked that. He said that he decided right then that the black cop was more powerful than the black petty criminals he had admired, that they had more clout, more juice, as the kids would say. And he wanted to become a black policeman so he could get in on the, quote, free drinks, the swagger, the respect, the fear. And that is a practice that we know Nixie Mayor Adams has taken full advantage of. That is why Eric Adams became a black cop. In his eyes, it was the closest he could get to being the equal of a white man. It was the most powerful he could become. It was how he could instill fear. He decided he would not be a criminal when he realized that as a black cop in his neighborhood, he could instill more fear, get more respect, and more perks. This realization by Adams was his recognition that we live in a police state. And he decided to buy in. It did not matter to him that the way that these officers were commanding respect and power was through abusing black men and boys just like himself. If he could be the black cop in the room, his takeaway was about power, not justice, not blackness, but power. Eric Adams does not care about police brutality, nor does he see being a police officer as a means of protecting black boys and men who are brutalized by the police. Eric Adams likes to dramatize the danger police face while dismissing the danger police pose to everyone else. Eric Adams cares solely about power. And he will conceal who he truly is when in certain black company. But he's always told us who he was. He's not a black mayor. He's not the hip-hop mayor. He's NYPD's mayor.
So, listen, I'm willing for our city to pay more for our citizens to actually be safe from abuse. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Assuming I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Being in contact with a system like this, regardless of how your case turns out, has tons of adverse consequences. Applying for housing or a new job is incredibly more difficult with a case on the docket. On top of that, a study by Kevin Morris and Jonathan Ben Menachem in 2022 found that, quote, traffic stops materially decrease participation for black and non-black residents alike in elections. Although they found that the stops are just such the norm for black people that its effects are a little bit lower. That normalized contact has other terrible effects on health, however, both mentally and physically. A 2019 study published in the National Library of Medicine found increased PTSD presence in populations with high lifetime police stops. And a 2021 meta-analysis published in JAMA Pediatrics found, quote, an association between police exposure and adverse mental health, sexual risk behaviors, and substance use for black youth.
Again, we're not in the days of the warriors with fucking gangs running rampant. As much as the fucking mayor wants to talk about drill music in the Bronx, like... And I know that they say fucking purse snatching crimes is up. Listen, there's a recession. Purse snatching crimes are going to be up. But as much as we're not in the 80s, we're not in the crack epidemic days, how many police officers does New York need? Again, if you reorganize police to be more about community policing, you make police less responsive to other problems that can be handled by other things like citizens actually like talking people down from doing fuck shit. Like, prioritizing mental health preparedness by the responders, by the EMS that's going to be there to help deal with people going through mental health crisis and other things. If you treated everything like it wasn't a crime, and you made police responsible for less in New York City, instead of just having a standing private army ready to fucking scare people into behaving and obeying your laws, maybe there would be more money for more shit. I'm just saying. Listen, I don't know. I'm not the top cop, mayor in chief, but something to consider. Listen, there's about 4 minutes left in this video. I'm going to take it on granted that he is supporting a conservative perspective of, like, fuck these migrant buses and the migrants on them, and, like, let's block them, and they're costing the city too much, we can't handle it. So, yeah, fuck his opinions. Not saying he didn't make a compelling argument, but, like, if you actually think about, like, if you're just watching the video for it to, like, play in your ear, like, something to listen to, and you already don't give a fuck about migrants, you're like, yeah, I agree with that. Nah, great. You have new arguments to be like, it costs city too much, the police budget is like $5.8 billion, the teachers, listen, their pensions are costing us too much, but, because of their pensions and because of this and the migrants, our city's less safe, so, like, get rid of them, and, let's, because our students are hurt more because these teachers are too protected. But if you're actually listening to these arguments and then you're thinking about, what would the world be like? What would New York be like without these things? And and you can actually do, deductive reasoning. You can actually think, 2 or 3 years into the future and think about what the impact of something would be. You're like, oh wow, that'd be bad. That'd be bad. So all those people that are in shelters that I'm worried about, they'd be on the streets. We'd have to try and find a way to round them up and deport them, and that also costs money. We just, again, why do anything? Why not just, hey, build that wall. Like, why not just, fuck it, build that wall, keep these niggas out. It's too costly, I don't want it. Like, why not just do that at that point? Like, why not just say, listen, we're not taking anybody else in this country. In fact, nobody's flying in, nobody's flying out. We're true isolationists. Keep the money inside. Let's not worry about whatever the fuck's happening in the rest of the world. Why not just do that shit at that point, right? Because it's stupid.
Many New Yorkers are completely upset with the idea of these cuts, even though there isn't as much opposition to these particular cuts as there are to others. But since the city is completely out of room and out of money, there aren't a whole lot of good options left at this point.
It is a struggle for the city to find new hotels and new shelter, but it's a mistake to respond to that challenge by trying to end the right to shelter. Folks will wind up sleeping on the street instead of in shelter, and for families especially.
Yeah, because, again, that's the alternative. They're saying, I don't want to have to house these people. Because nothing's to say that he won't keep sending people to New York if we shut down and get rid of the right to shelter law. It would just be a way to, again, move the needle, overturn the window away from helping as many people as possible, and to fuck them motherfuckers, so that it'd be easier to move to, let's just start deporting motherfuckers and let that be their problem. It's to push people to be more isolationist with, again, the people we are more ready to be xenophobic to under a white supremacist, mindset.
Diana, an asylum seeker from Colombia, who's being sheltered in a Bronx hotel with her husband and 2 children. She takes her 11-year-old son to public school in Manhattan, an almost hour-long commute on 2 subways, early enough so he can eat the free breakfast school provides.
The school has been a great help to us. They've been like angels who've swooped down from the sky.
Immigrants are not safe here. In some neighborhoods, migrants have been met with outright hostility.
They don't belong here on Staten Island. They definitely don't belong here in this neighborhood.
My man, you are not. When we talk about white supremacy and peak of evolution, peak of white maledom, I don't think anyone's thinking about you, bro. Like, get the fuck out of here. plenty of xenophobia coming from, people who are worried about being replaced, their jobs, their culture being erased. And again, there is intercommunity strife between people of color for a reason, because let's not act like all Hispanic people are not anti-black, and like people don't come over here and, shit on black people. But let's not also join white people in shitting on fucking disenfranchised and disadvantaged, migrants and Hispanic people and people who need relief, refugees who need help in general in the first place. Let's not be on this man's team or on Eric Adams' team. Let's be on the team of like, yo, we gotta look out for us because these niggas ain't looking out for us at all. These motherfuckers ain't giving a fuck at all. How long have certain people, if you've been homeless in New York before and had to be in a shelter, maybe you were able to get your shit together in 60 days, maybe you weren't. Now take you live in another country where you don't speak the primary language. You're readjusting again to a whole new country, trying to find places to be, like what existence is like out there, trying to get accustomed to the new rules of this place, trying to keep your family together, and you're now also competing with the 60 days clock that's running while in the shelter and dealing with all the problems that people complain in shelters, from people stealing their shit to being in hospitable guests and everything like that, fights breaking out, staff not giving a fuck, staff, abusing the power they have over you, etc., etc. But, 60 days is better than 30. But, again, it sounds like they want to get rid of that shit altogether if they could. To the streets with you!
They fled home in 2022 after she says her husband received death threats because of his work as a community organizer. She says the school is a rare source of stability.
I don't want to continue disrupting their lives. The journey from Colombia to here has already been very tough on them. We don't want to disrupt anything else for them. We as adults try to make everything seem okay. We put on a brave face and try not to make things seem too negative.
Oh, guess you should have stayed. Guess you should have risked death versus inconveniencing Texas and New York with the burden of your existence. Ooh. Yeah, because of course New York is going to go bankrupt if we continue to let more migrants in. Yes, that is the problem. Yes, us being too caring and too good and nice of a city, that is the problem. Sure it is. All right, Eric. Get your bald head out of it. Again, we are doing shit without thinking about how it would feel to experience some shit. You know how they say, walk on somebody else's shoes, put yourself in somebody else's shoes. You're supposed to be putting yourself in somebody else's shoes as them. And thinking about how you would feel in that situation. We're being like, listen, y'all niggas wanted to come up here. Y'all said New York. This is what New York got to offer you, bitch. So get with it. But it's like, would you want to do this shit? Would you want to be in this Fyre Fest fucking activity type bullshit? Would you want to be treated like fucking a space cadet recruit for fucking boot camp who's fucking being put through the works to prove that you're worthy of fucking, being treated like a human being? Again, what is the concept of being America, being the land, the greatest country in the world, the land of opportunity? What the fuck does any of that shit mean when we act like this? When we have guests over. People who may not stay forever. Fucking people who might try and get their situation worked out and, relocate back home if shit, calms down over there. Although, again, like I said, with the way we're acting in the world and the way climate change is working and the way we don't come up with solutions that actually fix shit, but we come up with fucking ways to just fund programs to fucking just be in the middle of fuck shit. Who knows if some of these fucking countries will ever, get back to the level where people don't feel the need to fucking flee them and shit. Again, we're in a proto-World War III already, with fighting happening all over the world. All it takes is for one major event for, that's when it becomes World War III for real. Once the world superpowers, are fully invested. But there's conflict happening all over. Millions of people dying all over. And, again, we just act like it's another given Sunday in this bitch.
So now number two, as you know, I said from day one that busing made sense. It made political sense, and to some degree it even makes policy sense. So why should the border states have all of the pain. So they share the pain with the rest of the country. That doesn't mean that I'm against immigration. I'll get to that part of it in a second. But I do think that there's no reason why Chicago, New York, and all these other cities shouldn't share the pain of the border states. And so that we can get a national policy that makes sense for all of us, including the immigrants.
Like, whatever happened in Texas, do I think about how people are living in Texas and what we should do to support the people in Texas? Maybe people being bused up to New York helps alleviate some of the, the situations that's happening for people in Texas. Although, let's be honest, that's not that's not why he was doing it. He wasn't saying like, oh, New York would love to help. Let me skip all these states between us and New York and go right to New York and send motherfuckers up there. That's who would be the happiest to help support us in our time of need. It wasn't like that. But again, in this concept of us being a country and not just a collection of states that could just do whatever the fuck we want, we're acting like it's the problem of having rules that are a little bit more give a fuck about human beings than the rest of the fucking country. Like, oh, listen, y'all the ones with the right shelter law. You could tell these niggas any day of the week live on the streets, be homeless, and then be subject to being harassed by police and having shit stolen by other people who are in desperate situations, or just by fucking people who resent, homeless people and unhoused people and want to fucking run their shit and run them out of town and fucking call the police on them 24/7. Like, it's your fault for having even this modicum of care. Not even really care, but like having rules that say you gotta do something. You gotta treat people like if you don't want them to be seen in this type of, if you don't want streets crowded with people just huddling together for warmth and survival, you gotta fucking provide them some limited level of shelter. So the bare minimum, again, we're acting like the bare minimum New York has, it's their fault for having that, for having this crisis happen in the first place. And it's like, listen, the federal government, of course, should do more. Because what is the alternative? Is the alternative just shutting down our borders to other people coming in, saying we can't take anything else, and again, just treating it like the pretend money? Because again, all this shit, the billions that people have, all of this is laissez fucking economics. It's all fucking shit that exists in computer systems. This is shit that is essentially not real outside of how we just move fucking numbers on an accounting book in a fucking on a Excel spreadsheet and shit like that. So again, are we prioritizing human lives? Or are we prioritizing profit? Are we prioritizing, the fucking industries that we're going to pay exorbitant amounts to do the bare minimum? Or are we going to try and step up and do more than the bare minimum? Again, I'm talking very communistic, like I'm not the motherfucker who's running the program is doing the shit. And I get it, you got to pay people to do shit and everything like that. But again, we are just every day just our nose to the grind, focus literally, hand in front of our face, just what our nose is meeting, and I think about the larger context of the ramifications of how this will play out if we don't do more. Because everyone wants to say during the Holocaust, during slavery, I would have done this, I would have done that, I wouldn't have just gone along. During segregation, we would have more than likely gone along. More than likely, for a lot of us, the change would not have been us. We would have begrudgingly like, oh, I guess they're changing shit. And look back and be like, well, thank God things have changed. Or like, this is the most annoying shit. It's unrelated, but not really. But this tangent. But when you talk to people about, even when I'm like, canvassing on the streets and talking to people about like, literally, like when I'm talking about, climate change, like literally, things don't get better unless people actively go to make them better. Unless we all take an active part in some way and work collaboratively to make things better. Like, again, slavery and chattel slavery, the world used to be full of all kinds of slavery, right? All kinds of caste systems. And we moved past chattel slavery, not just as a regular, evolution of human ideals and logic and shit like that. But niggas literally fought and bled and died for this shit. Like, people were putting their bodies on the line. People were being abolitionists. People were literally willing to sacrifice everything to end slavery and rescue people from slavery. And the result is some people will just say, well, there's still slavery in the world today. Listen, some of y'all are too black to be talking like that, because if you were literally like, sure, there's wage slavery, certainly. Capitalism is a form of fucking debt slavery on all of us. However, and this is not the proper capitalism anyway, because fuck capitalism and fuck wage slavery. However, the reason why people tell you to, pull yourselves up by the bootstraps and, hustle and grind in the first place is because most people would take, the, institutionalized form of exploitation over literal lynchings and whippings and, being, essayed and being forced to essay other people to continually create a line of new forced laborers who have no rights and aren't treated like human beings. So, again, things don't just evolve on their own. People literally have to take an active step to make things better. I want us to wake up and realize that, okay?
Cenk, thoughts on the numbers of migrants coming in?
So my number one thought is it's real. So we've shown you on the show many, many times in the past when Fox News, Republicans, Donald Trump has said overhype things, and they'd show you a caravan, and they'd be like, oh my God, the caravans are coming, right? And are there still things that are overhyped about this particular wave? Sure, like the absurd claim that Hamas and terrorists are part of the immigrants.
No, it's crazy.
Lunatic things. But right-wingers, you don't need that. Because this time, it's actually real. The numbers are much larger than they used to be. And so that's true. And so our job is to be honest with you guys, not pick political sides and go, oh, okay, well, it's inconvenient for the left for it to be true. It is true, okay?
The only way you're going to get immigration reform and the two political sides working together is if the two political sides acknowledge that our immigration system is in fact broken and we need to compromise with one another to come up with solutions to deal with this. My issue is that Congress really has no interest in any type of immigration reform. All they do is point fingers to Biden. Biden takes all the blame. In reality, legislation comes from Congress, and so they need to actually do their jobs and provide legislative reforms that we can work with here. They're doing none of that. So,
all right, now to the serious last point. Guys, look at them transferring the immigrants around like a hot potato.
I know.
Our government is so broken.
So broken.
We haven't done immigration reform in decades. So everybody's complaining about immigration. The border states are, now the major cities are, the blue states are, the red states are, the Republicans are, the Democrats are. But no one ever does anything. Because our government is irreversibly broken. They could be fixed if we just cleaned up politics and got money out of politics and went back to having an actual democracy. But as things stand now, people profit from the status quo. So they're never, ever going to fix this. All they're going to do is transfer these poor people around to all the different cities and blame one another. It's disgusting.
One final thing I'll say about this, and it's really important to know this. There's also an interest in not doing anything about immigration because there are business interests that want more labor. They've hated the fact that there's been a tight labor market, thus giving workers more leverage in negotiating for better pay and better benefits. And so bringing in more migrants, and look, what are Democrats and in some cases even Republicans calling for in response to the influx of migrants coming into the country? Let's rush the workers' visas. Let's rush the workers' visas. Workers. They want them to work in these jobs and essentially drive down wages for everyone, including the people who have had a little more leverage in this economy.
If anything, the Republicans don't actually want to do anything about the border for real because it's such an issue that they can constantly just campaign on and act like, Democrats are keeping them from doing more on. Clearly, the Democrats are willing to also be shitty with Republicans, with Biden also funding parts of Trump's wall and everything like that. And again, in the beginning of his presidency, extending Trump's COVID-related regulations on people being able to come into the country and other things like that. So it's not like, again, just being a little less worse than the other side.
Listen, doing these little Band-Aids is not going to help the situation. I understand the frustration that the mayors of these major cities are experiencing right now. I definitely understand the frustration with the federal government because at the end of the day, the federal government is tasked with dealing with our immigration policies and dealing with this issue overall. But at the same time, you're not going to solve the problem by limiting the hours of the day that migrants can be dropped off in New York City. And I understand the need for the 32 hours advance notice. I wish that we lived in a perfect world where they were doing that, but clearly they're not doing that, and they're just finding ways around it.
Okay, yeah. So it says the bloated NYPD budget could fund all migrant housing and only have to cut overtime in the subway. So not even just overtime overall. So what could NYC do with $155 million a year? So yeah, they're acting like these cuts to our libraries and everything else. They're acting like they're correlated again to make people upset with migrants. Make people more xenophobic, more hopeful that we just like push motherfuckers out or just deny people at a certain point. That's really what his wish is. But in reality, like again, we need more media literacy. We need to like double check our sources, compare shit to other things, and again, if they have money for all other types of shit in the city, again, like police budgets and shit like that, and police robots and fucking shit. And if there is money for all these cops to be standing around turnstiles, like fucking fare evasion is the biggest crime since 9/11. If we have the money for that shit, we should have the money to fucking look after our fucking citizens, right? Right? Alright. Alright, yeah, I'm about to get back to the video in a second. Thankfully, I can air this away.